ahead. Awesome. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. Right now, you can see Len because we have our camera focused on him. This is a hybrid event, one of our very first ones, so excuse any technical issues. So Len is an Ashlander who is very well versed in the world of space. So we can't wait to hear from him. But before he gets started, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our friends of the Ashland Library who support all of our adult programming, actually all of our adult programming. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Len. And if you have any technical issues, please let me know. I will take care of them as we go. We're really excited for this program, and we're excited that people are here for the program in person and online. Len, it's all you.
Okay, I'm Len Rabinowitz. I've lived in Ashland for 25 years. Some of you probably know me. I taught history at the high school for 18 years. I retired just in time in 2019. Oh, here's people coming in. Come on in. Come on in. Yeah. We haven't really started yet, so come on in. I still sub there every once in a while. I also frequently post my astro photos up on the Ashland, Mass Facebook page. Probably a lot of you have seen those, although it seems like Facebook doesn't like me much these days. It's not letting me do anything. Maybe it's envious or something. But I've been a space enthusiast since it's my dad's fault. He got me a telescope when I was 6 years old, and that was it. And I kind of grew up with all of this stuff. I'm also, I don't know how much you can read it, but I'm a NASA, what they call a NASA Solar System Ambassador. It's a voluntary thing. I'm not a NASA employee, but we get access to NASA resources, NASA staff and people, and we go around and spread knowledge about space and NASA programs and all of that. And this year is a good one because it's the 50th anniversary of the last mission to the moon, Apollo 17. Everybody knows the first one, Apollo 11. Not too many people know this last one, which in many ways was a much more ambitious mission. But this year also marks NASA's return to the moon with what they call the Artemis flights, which is the first one is going to launch in a couple of months. The first one is it's an uncrewed flight, but the crewed flights are scheduled for just a year or so from now. So we're going back. Okay. So I thought it was a nice kind of bridge from the last one to the next one, right?
So you're going to start your presentation?
Yeah.
I just need to share your screen on the Zoom.
Sure.
We're sort of new to hybrid, so we're trying to. Hybrid. I know, it's exciting. So I'm going to bring up.
You look familiar.
Me?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I see your pictures on Facebook.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm Diane Hirsch.
The name is familiar.
That's my husband, Scott Lavelle.
Terry Campbell.
Hi,
Terry. Nice to meet you.
And you're going to start from the beginning.
Yeah. There we go.
Perfect.
All right. Everybody can everybody see the screen and still hear me? If you have questions, please just interrupt. Speak up if you're here, or unmute yourself, or use the chat or whatever it is. But yeah, this year, all right, is the 50th anniversary of the last lunar mission, December 1972. All right, the last time we landed people on the moon. Okay, and currently, as we speak, they are testing the first Artemis rocket. It's out on the launch pad, and they're doing what they call it's a wet test. It's a full-up dress rehearsal. They do everything but launch the thing. Notably, they're testing fueling the rocket. This is not like pulling up to a gas pump with your car. You got a few million gallons of rocket fuel. And if all goes well with the wet test, they're going to launch it. They assume May or June. Okay, and it's a lunar mission, right? It's going to orbit the moon for a month. It's uncrewed. They're testing the whole system. Okay. How are we doing here? Oh, there we go. Okay. The photos are kind of an interesting comparison. On the left is the command module from the Apollo 8 mission, which was actually the first, 1968, it was the first crewed mission to the moon. It didn't land, it was an orbital mission. Really fascinating. It's the first time people really left the Earth, because to get to the moon, you have to go fast enough to break the gravitational pull of the Earth, 25,000 miles an hour. Okay. They orbited the moon for a couple of days. They did it Christmas time. They actually read from Genesis on Christmas Eve from the moon. All right, and that's a whole another thing. And of course, of the whole stack, the only thing that makes the whole trip is the command module. Right, so we have all of those. They're all on display in various museums and whatnot. They say that the worst job in the entire system was they land in the ocean, right? It's a water landing. The worst job in the entire space program apparently was being the Navy diver that had to go and open the hatch to get the guys out of there. Because you've got 3 guys that have been stuck in a tin can for 2 weeks without a shower, and apparently the food was pretty gassy.
Oh.
Right? So they said the stench was like, oh my God. But on the right is the new Orion capsule, which superficially it looks like the Apollo capsule. It's really very different. The design is just because of aerodynamics. It's got to be pointy in the front to get through the atmosphere, and then it needs the blunt bottom for the heat shield to come back through the atmosphere, right? Absorb all that heat. So, you know, it's a typical engineering thing. If you've got a similar problem, you're going to get a similar solution. But in fact, they're really very different. So, and I'll go into some of that presently. Okay. All right. So just to give you some of the background. Okay. Modern space program is really rooted in World War II. Okay. I hate to say it, but the Nazis had the most advanced rocket technology. The Germans, prior to the Nazis in the 20s and 30s, really started to look into this. Whereas we had Robert Goddard in the 1920s. Actually, in this area, he was launching in Worcester and Auburn. Okay, but he couldn't get the American military interested in it. He tried, but the Germans and then later the Nazis, they developed it. Okay, so the first serious rockets, it's Wernher von Braun. Okay, who is we after the war we got him. He's the guy that sent us to the moon. All right, he is a former. He's dead now, but he's a former Nazi. He was in the SS. He was not. He was a rocket engineer. He was not like a mass murderer or any of those guys. He did use Jewish slave labor, all right, or at least it was part of the system there. But the V1 was kind of a. It was like an early cruise missile, all right? Not very accurate, but accurate enough. They could launch it from Germany and it could hit London. They couldn't target it more accurately than that. It was a terror weapon. It really didn't do much militarily, okay? But it scared people and killed a lot of people. The V2 is the first rocket, okay? Again, a terror weapon, all right? It had a range of about 800 miles or so. They could launch it from Peenemünde in Germany, and they could target it at Antwerp or at London. They couldn't target it more accurately than that. So again, it's a horrific weapon. It killed a lot of people, destroyed a lot. It didn't make much difference militarily. what's the point of blowing up an apartment complex? Okay, other than it's just, it makes people mad.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, you're seeing it today, right? You're seeing it today, okay? But, you know, the militaries around the world took note of this. And when we, you know, at the end of the war, after D-Day, we are invading, okay? We wanted both the Soviets and the United States, we wanted those rocket scientists. Werner von Braun was a perfectly smart guy. He knew who he wanted to go. He did one look at the Soviets over there, and one look at the British and Americans over here, said, I know who I'm going with, and he surrendered to us. Okay, so we got it. And he's the guy that sent us to the moon. Okay, no doubting that. The Soviets had the space first in the 1950s. They were the first to get an artificial satellite up there, Sputnik. And it's hard to communicate to people these days. But at the time, 1957, that was seen almost like a new Pearl Harbor. All right. You could see it overhead. Satellites are easily visible if you just know where to look and have a reasonably dark sky. I see them all the time. Okay. Just looks like a little star going overhead. You could hear it on the radio. It didn't do much. All right. Just sent out a beep. All right. The point was to do it. It wasn't much more than that, but you could hear it on the radio. And it didn't take long to figure out that if you could put a satellite up there, you could put a bomb up there. Okay, it was the new high ground. So it freaked out a lot of people, scared a lot of people. Okay. They also, the Soviets were the first to put a living thing in space, dogs. Okay, Laika and Strelka. Okay, and I think there was Belka also, I think. They were the first to put a human being up there. And, you know, we thought they were so backwards. Okay, well, here they are beating us. Okay, so 1958, Eisenhower created NASA. All right, National Astronautics and National Aeronautics and Space Administration. If I'm going to represent them, I ought to know what it stands for, I guess. People are sometimes surprised it's a civilian agency. It's not connected to the military. Eisenhower did that on purpose. He came out of the military, and he very purposely did not want space militarized. He wanted this for civilian scientific research. Okay. Okay, so now Eisenhower's out of office January 61. Okay, he's the first president that the two-term limitation applied to, which was kind of funny because he probably could have won a third term if he'd wanted to do it. But all right, the moon landing program is Kennedy's. Okay, what is it, May in 1961, and you know, he felt it was an embarrassment, okay, for the nation that we kept, you know, we think we're so advanced, okay, and these backwards Soviets kept beating us. So he wanted something that could beat the Soviets. He saw it, he was interested in the scientific research, right? He thought that was important, but to him it was more like national pride, okay, Cold War competition, and he saw it as a way to beat the Soviets without shooting at them. All right, we could win a big thing, okay, without going to war. Okay, so he tasked them. It's a very famous, you can see it on YouTube, where he says, you know, we're going to land a man on the moon and return him safely to the earth. And he says, within this decade, okay, you can actually get into argument. Does that mean by 1969 or by 1970? Technically, it actually means by the end of 1970, right? People got this confused when the year rolled over to 2000. They say, sorry, guys, it's still the 20th century. You got to wait one more year for that. But Eisenhower actually was not a big supporter of Kennedy's moon program. Eisenhower thought it was something of a stunt. He said, what's your rush? Okay, and that you don't, Eisenhower's take was, you don't have to respond to every Soviet provocation. Okay, you have nothing against going to the moon. He said, why not, take the long haul with it? And I sometimes think he may have been right, actually. You look back on it, maybe that would have been better. But he was out of office. Kennedy was in office. He said, we're going to the moon. Okay. So they did it in 3 stages. All right. The first was what they call here Project Mercury's early 1960s. It's a single occupant vehicle. John Glenn, shown here, all right, said, you didn't get in the Mercury spacecraft, you put it on. All right. These things are on display. We still have the spacecraft. They came back to Earth. The Smithsonian has them. Other museums have them. You go and look at it. Yeah, I can see what he means. I mean, they used to call it spam in a can. I mean, it's tiny in there. Okay. It's a single occupant vehicle. And the basic job for Mercury was just get into space, get up there and see, can humans survive in space? We really didn't know anything about this, okay, at the time. All right. Al Shepard here was the first American into space, okay? A suborbital flight, 15 minutes, okay? He did what a lot of these like Blue Origin guys are doing now, just up. It's a ballistic trajectory, basically, up and down. All right, of course, but he did that. That had actually never been done before. Okay, because the first Soviet, Yuri Gagarin, went into orbit. All right, a 15-minute flight, but you know, he went into space. John Glenn is the first. Oh, hey, sorry.
You can use the page up and down too, if you'd like. For
Sorry, guys. Ooh. All right. There we go. John Glenn in the upper right there was the first American to orbit the Earth. Okay. And I think that's a photo of his launch, actually. And we simply didn't know. You know, they didn't know things like, could you eat in space? All right, would your gastric system work? It's not true to say there's zero gravity. There's plenty of gravity up there. What it is it's weightlessness. All right, you're basically in free fall around the Earth. Okay, gravity's holding you in orbit. All right, you're going at orbital speed, 17,500 miles an hour. It's like being in an elevator, but there's no bottom. Okay, so there's plenty of gravity, but you are weightless. So they didn't know would biological systems work. They still, even now, they still get problems with the eyes, the blood pools. You know, your system is designed, blood is pulled down, but that doesn't happen up there. They still get problems with the bones and everything. They didn't know, could somebody sleep in space? First guy to sleep in space was Soviet. Forget his name, the second guy. So that was the basic thing. Just, can we do this? Right? Can you get up there? And then you got to bring them back. All right. Glenn had a scare with that. He had a signal went off on his dashboard, basically saying that his heat shield was loose. Right? Uh-oh. You got a leak. Okay. When they didn't know, is his heat shield really loose? Which, if it is, he's dead. Right, or is it just a faulty signal? Okay, what they decided to do, the ship had retro rockets on the back that slowed it down. All right, and the plan was slow down and then eject the retro rockets. In his case, they kept the retro rockets on, figuring it would hold the heat shield on better. They found out when he got back that it was just a faulty signal. But imagine, you know, you're hitting the atmosphere at 17,000 miles an hour. It gets to like 5,000 degrees, you know, two inches from you. Talk about gutsy. Okay. Right. This is not where it's supposed to be.
Page up.
yeah, did you try the page up again?
that it skipped like a lot of different missions. Okay, hold on. All right,
About Gemini.
hold on. Yeah, here we go. Okay. So, it's one sad thing about it. Kennedy didn't live to see the moon landings. It's always bothered me. He did live to see successful completion of Project Mercury. All right, so he saw it off to a good start. All right, and it ended in 1963, and so did he. Right, it's one of my earliest memories. We lived in DC. My dad worked for the Pentagon, and his murder is one of my earliest memories, actually. If there was anything good to come out of his assassination, which there wasn't, it's that it probably solidified going to the moon. This was his dream. Okay, we've got to honor the martyred president. He himself was actually getting concerned about it. He was concerned about the costs. All right, it was expensive to do this, and to him, yeah, he knew that scientific research was important, but to him, the national pride, competition with the Soviets, Cold War was always more important. He actually proposed a couple of months before he was killed, let's go together. All right, let's do a joint Soviet mission, American mission to the moon. At the time, Khrushchev didn't take him up on it. And then he was killed. And Johnson was a huge supporter of this. That's why half of the stuff is in Texas, right? Johnson never followed up on it. Khrushchev later said that he decided he did want to do it, but it never. There were joint missions later, post landing. Okay, all right. Second one. Okay, Mercury's done. Project Gemini was the second one. It's a mid-60s, it's a bigger vehicle, dual occupant vehicle. And the main thing was to test procedures to get to the moon. Okay, 4 main components to that. Extravehicular activity. Can you work outside of a spacecraft? All right, can we design, the tools are different, all right, because they have to absorb the torque. If you try working a wrench in space, you're going to go spinning with it, but the wrenches have to be different and all of that kind of stuff. Could we design space suits, right, that can protect from the radiation and all of that? These were longer duration. The longest one was 2 weeks. And really critical was rendezvous and docking. Could you have 2 spacecraft meet in orbit, which is not like catching up with somebody on the highway. All right. If you've got one spacecraft here and another spacecraft here, and this one, I'm sorry, some of you can't see me, I guess, but one in front and one behind. If the one behind speeds up, all it's going to do is going to go into a higher orbit. Okay. And then when it's in a higher orbit, it'll actually slow down. Okay. What they have to do is the one that's behind has to actually slow down, drop into a lower orbit, which speeds it up. Okay, and then they have to raise it. I mean, it's really complicated trying to do that. And then, can you get 2 spacecraft to connect together? Something we do routinely now. Okay, can you do this? All right, in space. The first time they did the docking with the what's called the Agena here, Gemini 8. All right. Does anybody know Gemini 8? Take a guess. Who was the pilot of Gemini 8? It's a famous astronaut. Anybody here or online?
Buzz Aldrin.
Close.
It's the only famous one that's still alive that I.
No, he's not alive anymore.
Buzz Aldrin is.
Buzz Aldrin is, but not the guy who was the pilot.
Is it Neil Armstrong?
Yes,
Okay.
Neil Armstrong was the pilot of Gemini 8. I think this is why they chose him to pilot to the moon. The first time those 2 things connected, as soon as they connected, it went into a wild spin, right? He's got about 60 seconds before they black out and then they're dead.
Hmm.
All right, to figure out what the heck happened. Okay, they first thought it was, the Agena here had gone wrong. No, it wasn't that. The maneuvering jets on the Gemini spacecraft had started firing, right? And that's what was sending it into this spin. And once he figured that out, he shut those off and got control of it. But just imagine you're going 17,000 miles an hour, you're 300 miles up in a wild spin, and you've got about 60 seconds before you die, right? And he's still cool-headed enough to figure it out. I think that's why he was chosen. He thought he was going to get thrown out of the program.
Hmm.
No, I think that's why he was picked for the first lunar landing, right? Because that also had problems. Okay, so this flew. All right, now Project Apollo. Okay, all right. Late 60s, early 70s, it's a 3-occupant vehicle. All right, and the job was to explore the moon. All right. The Saturn V, the rocket that launched it, remains the most powerful rocket ever built. It's going to remain that until they actually fire the new one. All right, coming out of the bottom here, 7.5 million pounds of thrust. All right, to lift that thing. It's one hell of a firecracker. My brother runs a conservation company. Does a lot of restoration work, mostly art, but sometimes some other things. We have a couple of Saturn V's that were built and were never fired. All right, his company restored one of them. It's on display in Houston at the Advanced Space Center there. NASA wanted to put it on display, but they also wanted to study it. Okay, and he said it's basically a gigantic gas can with a match at the bottom. Just light it and run. Okay, so once they 7.5 million pounds of thrust. Okay, once they launch the Space Launch System, it no longer will be that. The Space Launch System, which is what they're going to launch the Artemis missions with, it's shorter. This is about as tall as the Statue of Liberty. All right. The SLS is a little shorter, but it's more powerful. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. I mean, this is just brute force to get off the surface of the Earth. The Saturn V is 7.5 million pounds of thrust, and it's the first rocket built for strictly non-military purposes. The earlier ones that launched the Gemini and Mercury, they were actually, it's a kind of a nice symbolism. They were built to launch nuclear weapons, all right? And they were repurposed for, it's kind of a nice swords to plowshares kind of idea. They were repurposed to launch spacecraft. Of course, now probably most rockets that we build are for peaceful purposes, but this is the first one built for strictly peaceful purposes. Enormously successful. There was never, once it was qualified for flight, it was never a problem with the Saturn V. Not that stuff happens, but not of any significance. Everybody knows Apollo 13, the one that exploded, but that was with the Apollo spacecraft. All right, it wasn't with the launch vehicle. All right. And of course, again, if you have questions, just pipe up. Okay, now the Apollo landing sites. First of all, you can see the landing areas from Earth. People ask me this all the time. Why don't they just point a telescope and look at the landing sites? It's too small. All right. You would need, even the Hubble telescope doesn't have the resolution to do it. Okay. You would need a telescope with a mirror the size of a football field, all right, to be able to resolve that. The landing sites have been photographed, all right, but they've been photographed from lunar orbit. I'll show you some of them. We have something called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, about 60,000 feet above the lunar surface. Even that had a tough time finding them. It's small. The biggest things down there are the descent stage of the lander, which is only about 15, 20 feet across. All right. And the rover, which is the size of a Prius, basically. All right. It's just really small. Okay, you'd never be able to see it from, and the James Webb, people talk about, that's not designed for that kind of thing. All right.
James Webb.
The James Webb Space Telescope.
Okay.
Was launched a couple of months ago, but it's designed for deep space. It just, you can't see them from the Earth. You can look at the areas. All right, yeah, come on in. Okay. This, yeah, whatever. All right. Now, if you take a look, all right, the early flights, yeah, come on in. Yeah, it's okay. All right. Yeah, come on in. We don't bite.
Young.
That's okay, right? You know, might be a little over their heads, but come on in. Right. This was dangerous to do. All right. There's no yeah, come on in. Have a seat.
Yeah, they're right there. Thanks.
There's no chance of rescue. All right. There's no possibility of repair or anything like that. So they did everything that they possibly could. You can have this chair to try and make it safe, but this is just inherently dangerous. Okay, so the all of the flights, first of all, none of the flights landed on the far side. It's not the dark side. It gets as much light as any other part of the moon. There was some talk of doing a far side landing, but it was just deemed too dangerous. They'd have to put a communication satellite in orbit and all of that. So they're all on the side that we can see. They were all done in the lunar morning. Okay, the sun low on the horizon. Now, a lunar day is a month long. Okay, because the orbital period, the moon does rotate, by the way. People think it doesn't. If it didn't rotate, we would see the other side. Right, it's just that the orbital period is the same as the rotational period. Right, if I should have brought the stuff with me, but its day is as long as its year, basically. Right, that's why it keeps the same face to the Earth. So they were all on that side, all designed to land when the sun was low on the sky, so that they were concerned about the heat, okay, and solar radiation and stuff. So they land with the sun low in the sky that minimized some of that. It also gave it much more contrast on the surface. It's the moon, it's not the Earth, right? There's no air to diffuse light, okay? There's no like haze as you look off into the distance. The astronauts had real trouble judging distances. They talked about sometimes with the rovers not being able to see a small crater until they were practically on top of it. Okay, just because of how the shadows work and the surface is very reflective. All right, I'll talk about some of that. So the early missions, all right, here's the first one, Apollo 11. They landed in these flat areas. They're called seas, although they're not seas, right? Apollo 12 also, 13 didn't land, of course. Apollo 14, all right. By that point, we'd started to have a little more confidence about what we were doing, okay? The later missions, 15, 16, and 17, that brought the rover with them, they went into some tougher terrain. You can see here, they've landed in these light areas, which are mountainous and valleys and all of that. The geologists wanted to look at it. All right. So the early flights, Apollo 11, in fact, for all it's quite incredible. It really actually wasn't that much of a mission. I said, look, just land. Okay, get out there, take a call from the president, stick the flag in the ground, grab a rock, go home. Okay, just don't die. Okay, which they almost did actually. All right, the computer was getting overloaded and they were running out of fuel. All right, Neil Armstrong had to land the thing manually, actually. He landed with, I think, 15, 20 seconds of fuel left. All right, you want to talk about like, even him, his heart rate was up to 140 beats a minute.
Wow.
Right, I don't blame him. Okay, anyway, 17 is often what they call the Taurus Littrow region, which you can see it naked eye, actually, the area. All right, And it's this combination, there's some flat plains, but there's also more mountainous, and that the geologists wanted to take a look at that area. Okay, now it's 17. It's the last lunar landing. All right, it's the only nighttime launch of a Saturn V. You young people, all right, you got to promise me something. You have to promise me that you're going to invent a time machine. Okay, and then when you do, you got to send me back to see this. I would give anything to see a Saturn V launch at night. All right, and then after that, you got to send me back to see the Beatles at Ed Sullivan, but you don't even know about that. I'll show you that in a minute. Gene Cernan is the last man on the moon. All right. And he basically just said, he died a few years ago. These guys were all shocked that it's been 50 years and not back. Okay. This mission was the only one to send a scientist. All right. Nowadays, they launch all kinds of people, particularly with SpaceX and Blue Origin and all of that. You guys, you're going to be able to take a trip to the moon. Would you go? Would you go to the moon? Why
No.
not?
It was too scary.
These guys went.
Still
They were pretty gutsy. I would go. Would you go if I went with you?
Still no.
I would go. I would
All right,
go.
yeah. Okay, anyway. But this was the one time that they sent a scientist, all right, Harrison Schmitt. Okay. The early guys were all military test pilots. That was one thing early on. They didn't know who, all right, the president's ever going to go. Who do we send? Who? All right. They figured military test pilots were used to risk taking and were used to stress. All right. Nowadays, of course, look, they just sent 90-year-old Bill Shatner. All right. Now, one of the things that 17 got done, all right, one of the questions was, and it's kind of an odd one, but it was one of the things that the scientists wanted to figure out is what color is the moon? All right. There isn't a lot of color there, but there is some. Okay. So they actually brought along, these are like these things that you get like in a hardware store when you're trying to match paint colors, right? They brought along these things. So they had special cameras, all right? People get confused. There were no video cameras were brought, all right? They had television cameras. We got live broadcasts from the moon, all right? That's a whole nother story. Setting that up, the root infrastructure for what we all take for granted today, for cable and satellite TV, the root infrastructure for that was built to do this. All right. There were reception areas. It wasn't actually technically quite live. There's a few seconds delay because it wasn't right from the moon to your TV set. It went through receiving areas and then was broadcast. And there were some interruptions in coverage and whatnot because of the Earth's rotation and all that kind of stuff. But they had television cameras and film cameras. For young people, when I go over this today, they find it very hard to understand that digital cameras didn't exist. It was all taken on film. All right. So it was there was no VCR, no camcorder. All right. There were live television broadcasts, okay, and film cameras, specially designed cameras for this. This photo has been a little bit enhanced to get the orange color out of it. But the discovery of this orange regolith, which by the way, that's the term for it. Okay. You hear the thing lunar dust. It's not really dust like we think of, in our living room or whatever. Lunar dirt, lunar soil. Soil and dirt are biological. All right. Those are terms of convenience. the closest analogy, it's actually dangerous, this stuff. The closest analogy to it on Earth, I think, is beach sand. All right. It's more like crushed rock and little glass silicates. All right. It's made in essence from the moon getting pulverized when stuff smashes into it. All right, and heated and all of that. And they were worried about this stuff. At first, they thought it might be so deep that when they landed, they would just sink into it. Okay, well, we sent landers there. That didn't happen. All right, but they were very worried about it getting into the equipment, right? And the astronauts breathing it in. All right, they had to do a lot to dust off and clean off. And people sometimes say, well, how come there's no blast crater underneath the lander? Because they shut the engine off before they landed. All right, it's not complicated, okay? You know, if you want to stop your car, you don't do that with the gas pedal to the floor, okay? Right, you use the brakes. The engine was throttled down, all right? If they used the engine full power, it would have been initially to slow down so that they go into that parabola to come down onto the surface. They actually shut the engine off a few feet above the surface because of the dust. They didn't want the dust to kick back up into the equipment, and it just dropped the last few feet. All right. At any rate, that color, it's the remnants of a volcanic eruption 3.5 billion years ago. All right, maybe undisturbed since that time. But what it told them is that the moon had that the moon is, and actually the moon's not geologically dead now. They still detect some moonquakes and whatnot. But that certainly the moon was geologically active when it was first formed. All right, that was an important piece of information. Now, let me show you this nighttime launch. Sorry.
You want the lights off for that?
No, that's okay. Now, there is sound to this.
Thanks, man.
Is there sound on the TV or
Oh, it's not coming through this either.
try just turning it up?
Okay, well, I need my glasses. Oh, do you see volume on here? There's no volume, right?
Oh.
No,
Is
okay.
It's probably run speakers out of a socket.
No, that's okay.
You know what, I can send the link out to everybody, or, you know, you can listen to it at home. Sorry, Len.
Just let it play. This is what old style television was like. No cable, this is over the air.
It's on your screen. It's not showing up on.
It's not showing up.
It's not.
No, not on.
You're sharing this screen.
No.
Move screens.
Well,
So I say maybe just go on to the next thing.
yeah, okay. I guess that's not showing up, so.
It's available on the web.
Oh, yeah. That's too bad because this is the Apollo 17. One of the things about it is that it's the only time we got a full video of the launch from the moon. All right. They had a rover with them. All right. What the astronauts called a solar powered go-kart with beach chairs. All right, is basically what it was. All right, and people say, how did you get that go-kart, on the lunar lander? It folded up. All right, it's really ingenious. All right, the tires folded in. The tires were metal mesh, wire mesh. All right, because vulcanized rubber doesn't do very well in vacuum at 250 degrees. Okay, the tires folded under and the body collapsed in, and then it fit. There was a storage bay in the bottom half of the lander. All right, and then when it came out, it like sprung out and unfolded. There's video of that actually. All right, so what they did, the rover had a television camera on it. Okay, what they did was they parked the rover, 50 feet away from the lander, something like that, aimed the television camera at the lander, and then the camera actually, the camera could be remote controlled from Earth, all right? But the guy controlling it, he had a joystick, all right? He had to account for like, the distances. The moon's about 250,000 miles away, roughly. Takes about a second and a quarter for a signal to get from the moon to the Earth, and then another second and a quarter to get from the Earth to the moon. All right. Which is that they could have live conversations. If you listen to it, there is this little delay in it. Close enough you could get a live conversation. But the guy controlling the tilt of the camera actually had to account for that. All right, when he was pulling the camera back so you could see the launch of the lunar lander. All right, and he screwed it up the first couple of times. Apollo 15 and Apollo 6. I don't blame the guy. All right, Apollo 16, but by Apollo 17 he got it right. And it's I wish I could show it because it's really strange looking. All right, there's no no sound, of course, right? But it used what's called hypergolic fuels. This is another thing people say sometimes. Well, how come there's no flame? Okay. Hypergolic fuels ignite on contact. They don't need to burn. All right. So there's no air, there's no oxygen. So it just looks like you see these explosive bolts go off, right? The two things have been bolted together. And then the thing just rises, right? And you see it kind of parabola arc over, it's going back into orbit. It's too bad I can't show it, but I would highly recommend that people watch it. Okay. All right. Now, there's your crew. All right. That's Gene Cernan, last man on the moon. All right. Commander. All right. This is Ron Evans. He was the command module pilot. The old Apollo craft, I mean, that stuff worked. It was reliable, okay? But it was pretty unsophisticated by today's standards. So they had to have somebody in the command module piloting it. So he stayed in orbit around the moon, okay? He didn't go down to the surface, okay? That was a weird job, okay? And this is Harrison Schmitt. All right, so far the only scientists to go to the moon.
The one on the left standing.
This one, oh, you got.
Yeah, we have a different one, so I'll just.
You're not seeing my, little.
No, that's my fault. We should have done a duplicate,
okay. Seated there is, the guy seated is Gene Cernan, last man on the moon. Standing to the right is Ron Evans. He's the guy who stayed in the Apollo command module. Standing to the left is Harrison Schmitt. Harrison Schmitt is still alive. All right, these guys, here's one thing to think of. The 12 people that walked on the moon, only 4 are still alive. All right, and they're all in their 80s and 90s. Buzz Aldrin, I think, is 91. Okay. These guys were tough. They hang around forever, but we're all only human. So it's time for a new generation. So you guys, okay, you have to go to the moon. All right, all right. Would you go to Mars? There's air there. Okay, right, okay, right.
Air makes all the difference.
Funny, Harrison Schmitt was the lunar module pilot, but in fact, the lunar module pilot is not the guy that flew the lunar module. I don't know why that happened. Buzz Aldrin was the lunar module pilot, and he's giving Neil Armstrong a lot of information, right? But in fact, Armstrong was the commander, and he's the one who actually flew it. And what happened on 11 was that the computer was getting overloaded. It was aiming them towards a boulder field. All right, so he took over and flew it manually. The computer controlled the descent, right, like this. But in the last couple of minutes, the commander could control it this way, like a helicopter. Okay, so he overshot it. He said, "I'm not going to land in the middle of a boulder field." Okay, they went a few hundred feet past, and obviously they made it down. Okay.
And then we're almost at about an hour, so
Yeah.
I just wanted to let you know.
Yeah, all right, I know. I get too excited. All right. There had initially been 20 flights. All right, 18, 19, and 20 were canceled by Nixon. A couple of reasons. People think this is weird. I remember it. It wasn't weird at all. This is publicly funded. All right, the public support. This was Eisenhower, I think, was right. He thought it was like a big stunt. Okay. Well, you've already won the Super Bowl. Why are you going back to play the Super Bowl again and again and again? I remember my own parents saying this. They were big supporters of this. They said, we got Vietnam going on, civil rights, environment, inflation. All right, we did it. We beat the Soviets to the moon. What do we keep doing this for? All right, it was expensive. It was dangerous. All right, so the public support was simply gone. All right, that's all there is to it. Okay. Nixon canceled the last three. He did approve the space shuttle program. All right. Apollo 17 launched December 7th, 1972. It returned 12 days later. Explored the Taurus Littrow region. This is one of the photographs taken from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. And even this, you can see it's so blown up, it's pixelated, you can barely make out any detail. But you can see that's the lander, okay? The descent stage is still there. That's the shadow of the flag, okay? Oh, that's right, you guys don't have my...
You can see it there. You can see where the flag is.
Yeah, it's pointing to it. And the rover tracks, all right? The Taurus Littrow region is the longest lunar mission. There were 3 days on the surface, okay? The lander was not very comfortable to sleep in. Okay, noisy. There was no soundproofing or anything like that. These last guys, they gave them a hammock to sleep on. Apollo 11, find some room on the floor. All right, your first guys on the moon, I don't think you're going to sleep much, but they were the ones to travel the furthest from the lander. That was always a thing. All right, you've got to bring everything with you. Okay. There's no service stations. So food, everything. So they did it by go to your furthest point first. What if the rover doesn't start back up? You're gonna have to walk back. Okay. So the furthest they could go is what they call the walk back distance, however much oxygen and water they've got with them. All right. Go to your furthest point first and then track back. Okay. It's the largest sample return, 254 pounds. Okay. Much of which still hasn't been looked at. All right. They locked a lot of it away. Some of it was given away. Some of it is missing. There was one attempt to steal some of the rocks. I don't know what this guy wanted to impress his girlfriend. What the hell are you going to do with it? If you ever tell anybody, you're going to be in jail. It didn't work. And 5 mice were brought along, right? They stayed in orbit. They wanted to see the impact on living things. Only 3 of the mice survived, but still, people could die out there, and people are like, oh, well, they took the risk, but the mice die and everybody gets all upset about it, right? At any rate, so that was 50 years ago. Now, briefly, I love these images. Okay. This is just a standard one. All right. I think that's Gene Cernan. Okay. The commander. That's the lander. The flag. Okay. Everybody understands it's not flapping in the breeze. All right. First of all, I don't think the flags were made from cloth. All right. Everything was weight. Everything. Okay. I think it's made from a kind of foil, actually. All right. But you see, it's got 2 poles, right? The poles snapped open. Okay, and the surface is actually hard. The dust is not very deep. They had to kind of drill it into the surface. All right, that's why it looks like that. Snap open and then go like this. All right, there's no breeze. Okay, I love this one of the lunar rover, because one of the dust, they're concerned about dust. The tires kicked up dust. All right, so it had, you know, mud flaps, basically. One of them fell off. All right, this Pearl, what do you get off flat on the moon? Okay, right? And for all the high technology, they had to fix it with duct tape and paper maps, right? But it worked. Okay, this is just a picture of one of the rover trips that you really see. You take a look at it, that problem with the distance, you can't really judge how far away that mountain is. All right, and this boulder that was here, when the astronauts first saw it, they thought it was much smaller than it was. When they approach it, it's actually the size of a house. Okay, and then this one, the film canister on this flight was actually stored not in the spacecraft, but in the service module. So the guy had to climb out of the spacecraft to get it. It remains the furthest distance that any astronaut ever floated away. These guys are on the surface, but for somebody just out in space, this guy's 200,000 miles from Earth, going 25,000 miles an hour and just hanging on to a little handhold. All right. And one wrong slip and there's nothing you can do about it. Okay. Nothing, they maybe could have tried something.
So they weren't tethered at all?
They did have a tether, right? The astronauts actually didn't like the tether. It's like a seatbelt. It can cause problems as much as it can solve. And in fact, if he did come loose, what wouldn't happen is that he would float away. That wouldn't happen. He'd actually traveling with the spacecraft. The problem would be more like, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if he tries to reach for the handhold, it's possible that doing this actually kind of propels him backwards, right? And then you get into, do you send somebody else out after him? Well, then you potentially got two guys in problem. You know, one of the problems was, what if one of them on the lunar surface falls over? All right, because the center of gravity is different, 1/6 gravity. Can they get back up on their own? Okay. And if they can't, does the other guy go and help him? All right, because they potentially have two guys down. All right. Fact of the matter is they did fall over a couple of times and they did figure out ways to get up. All right. At any rate, let me very quickly just talk about the Artemis missions. But all right, the Space Launch System. It's currently on the pad. All right, it is being tested now as we speak. All right. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. I'm going to go a couple of minutes long, I guess. But
Len, is this the one that's going to be happening now that's 50 years from the first one?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. This is now. All right. NASA's newest heavy lift launch system. All right. 8.8 million pounds of thrust. So it's more powerful than the Saturn V. Okay. It's a little different. 2 solid rocket boosters and 1 main core stage. It's using some of the old shuttle technology. They're reusing, the boosters are basically shuttle boosters that have been extended. The shuttle, they were reusable boosters. This is not a reusable system. All right. The reusability, the SpaceX rockets, they're amazing, but the reusability actually adds weight, all right, for the extra fuel and protection and all of that kind of stuff. And this, you got to get stuff off the ground. You need payload capacity. The engines are old shuttle engines that have been repurposed. And of course, they were reused dozens of times in the shuttle. They're one use now, okay, but at least it's reusing old engines. The first configuration will be able to send 59,000 pounds, all right, beyond the moon. That is a big, heavy lift rocket. All right, the SpaceX rockets, for all they're amazing, they don't have anywhere near this lift capability. All right, later configurations will have 9.5 million pounds of thrust and lift over 100,000 pounds. All right, that's one of the problems. You got to get everything off the surface of the Earth. All right, so you need lift capability. Okay, system is sometimes criticized because it isn't reusable. Some parts of it are. All right, but right now we don't have the capability for both reusability and heavy lift. I don't doubt that we'll develop it, but oops. Okay, that's the basic structure. All right, the booster is the main core, and then the spacecraft. Okay, I'll wrap it up with this, I guess. The Orion spacecraft, it looks like the Apollo, but it's really much more advanced. All right, the look is just because of aerodynamics. All right, it's much larger. It can hold 4 people. The seats are retractable, so they can fold the seats up. All right, it actually has a private zero gravity bathroom. Okay, instead of just going in a bag or in the suit. Okay, which is what they did. Much more advanced electronics. This can fly on its own. All right, so it can hold 4 astronauts. They can all go down to the surface. Okay, I think they can actually remotely control it with the equivalent of an iPad. I think. All right, it has some reusability. All right, Apollo, they knew they couldn't sustain that economically. You know, they knew they couldn't sustain it, but they were under. You know, had Kennedy lived, I think he might have scaled the program back. All right, if it had come from him, you know, okay, look, guys, take till 1975. All right, they started to look at reusable stuff in the 60s, but they didn't have the time to develop it. Some components actually were reused. Some of the early capsules, they took out some of the electronic components and used them in some later ones, but it was never designed for it. This is designed for deep space operations, okay, to the moon, beyond the moon, to Mars, okay. So it's much more advanced. It looks like Apollo, but it's much more advanced. All right.
And when is that one going up?
Uncrewed, all right, it's all gonna launch in a couple of months.
Wow.
They're doing what's called the wet dress test rehearsal. It's everything short of launching it. Notably fueling the thing up. All right, millions of pounds of thrust. You know, it's not exactly gasoline. Okay, but assuming that the wet test that's going on now. This testing. All right, assuming and it's launching from the same launch pad as Apollo 11. Right, 39B. Assuming that the test goes well, they're going to launch this thing. They think around June.
Oh,
Right,
wow.
without a crew. Okay, it's a full up dress rehearsal, but it's going to go to the moon. It's going to orbit the moon for a month. Okay, come back, and then the first crewed flights are scheduled for about 2025. All right, you know, the original Apollo program was kind of a crash program, and with the death of the president, we've got to meet his goal. I think he would have scaled it back, actually. All right, I'll end it with this. Artemis 1, this is just a couple of months. All right, I'll let you know when they decide to launch. People don't watch it. All right, uncrewed lunar orbital test flight. The testing of the test is going on now. All right, approximately June. Artemis 2 will be the first crewed flight. All right, lunar orbit. Okay, not a landing. SpaceX is developing the lander. They have to develop that. Scheduled for 2025. Artemis 3, which is what it's been funded through. All right, with the first lunar landing flight. They want the first woman on the moon, the first person of color on the moon, scheduled for the late 2020s. And it always had this social aspect to it. It was never just about scientific exploration. It was also national pride. Okay, beat the Soviets, technological development. Okay, it always had this other aspects. Long term, they're going to put a space station around the moon, right? The lunar gateway. Okay, so basically the spacecraft be like you saw in 2001 if you saw that. You take a shuttle up to the space station. From the space station, you take something Orion to the moon, okay? And then Orion will park at the gateway and the landers will go back and forth. And the landers will all be reusable, all right? And they want to build a lunar colony, all right, and use that as a spring sport going to Mars. But this is going to happen. This is funded. And Artemis 1 is going to launch in a couple of months, all right, once they get past the test. And that thing is a beast. And I always go too long, but that's
No.
because I'm like that. We have questions?
Yeah, actually, Alicia wants to know, when will astronauts be selected for Artemis 3?
I think the Artemis crews have already been, so I can find that out. You know what you do? But that's why, because I have access to NASA resources. Email me that question and maybe others, and I'll find it out and get it back to you.
Perfect.
I think they've already been selected because they have to be trained and everything,
Mhm.
right? Any other questions here or?
Is there any cooperation with Elon Musk? Like-
Yes, yeah. SpaceX is a contractor of NASA, basically. NASA provides most of the funding. For the Artemis missions, SpaceX is developing the lander, all right, the lunar lander that'll basically go from the gateway down to the lunar surface. But also in a bigger picture, what NASA wants to do, and I think they're right with this, they want to get out of the low Earth orbit business. All right, they've been doing low Earth orbit for 30 years now. All right, they want to, the space station, that's going to be decommissioned in a few years. All right, it's been up there for almost 30 years, right? They want to give the low Earth orbit stuff to private companies, launching satellites, space station, space. There are people looking at space hotels, all right? They want to let SpaceX and Blue Origin and other companies have that stuff. They want to focus on what they're good at, which is the really deep space stuff. Back to the moon, this time permanent. Build a lunar colony, okay? Onto Mars, all right? Or look at stuff like, the Hubble telescope has been going to be decommissioned in a few years. It's still got a few years of life in it. But look at the James Webb Space Telescope, all right? That's an incredible thing, all right? That's what they're good at. Or the probes that have been sent out of the solar system or have been sent to Saturn and Jupiter, and they want to focus on that, the really big, deep space stuff. All right, that's what they're good at. So yeah, they partner with SpaceX. All right, in this, SpaceX is developing the lander, or the lunar lander. But I think what they're looking at, what they're doing, I think they just did it yesterday, is let the private companies use the Kennedy spaceport, all right, for launch and that kind of facility. And then let the private companies have the low Earth orbit. All right, satellites and space stations and space hotels and all of that kind of stuff. They want to focus on the big stuff, the really deep space stuff, which is what they're good at. All right, and the one that you're going to get the first images in a couple of months, the James Webb Space Telescope. That thing is unbelievable, what that is. So the answer is yes. Right? Any other questions there?
Yeah, in terms of communicating between the Earth and let's say Mars, how does it work, and does anything interfere with it? Any of the stuff?
There's not much in the way of interference.
Yeah.
With the moon, it's close enough you can have live conversation. If you go listen, I don't know, some of the stuff has been edited, to take some of this stuff out. But you go listen, go to the NASA website. They have all of this stuff up there. You can hear in the live conversations with the moon, there is a little bit of a delay because it takes, if somebody says something on Earth, it takes about 1.5 seconds to get to the moon. Then the guy responds, it takes another 1.5 seconds to get back on Earth. You can still have a live conversation with them. You hear these little delays. On Mars, it's 20 minutes, even at the speed of light. So that has to be much more operate. That's why the rovers, all right, the rovers can operate on their own much more, right? But also they have to plan that to the extent that they're sending communications from Earth to the rover. They've got to plan that time delay in, all right? If we want it to happen at 10:20, we got to send that command at 10, right, for it to get there. So on Mars, there won't be any, it's all time delay. There won't be any there'll be direct communication, but they won't be able to have it live. There's not much in the way of interference. Sometimes you get solar flares and stuff that can send out, disruptions and whatnot, but it's more just that it takes time. Space is big. It travels at 186,000 miles a second and still takes 20 minutes to get there.
Alicia says that there's an organization called For All Moonkind that seeks to historically preserve the Apollo landing sites on the moon. So I'll
Yeah.
send you all that link as well.
Yeah, that's another thing. In the 70s and 80s, there were people telling NASA, you got to work to preserve these sites. All right, NASA then said, you're crazy. What are you talking about? They don't see it that way anymore. All right. They actually, you can find this online, 5 or 10 years ago, issued guidelines. All right. They do want to return to the landing sites. All right, because they want to study them. All right, about what happens to stuff that's been sitting on the lunar surface for 50 years. Right. Believe it or not, astronaut poop is there. Right. Weight, everything. Right. You don't need it anymore. Kick it out. All right. So bags of, poop. But what happens to biological material sitting out on the lunar surface for 50 years? The rovers are still there. Right. And now they have issued guidelines about preserving those sites. They don't want them touched. They're human, world historic sites or whatever. There is actually a small but growing field of space archaeology. All right, just all this stuff out there, and of course the creme de la creme are the Apollo landing sites. But it's more than that. I think there's a legal problem with it. The property that's there, the stuff, is still American property. The landers, the rovers, and everything. So if somebody tried to take that and sell it on eBay or whatever, they'd be arrested in minutes. That's U.S. government property. But we're a signatory to what's called the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, which says that no nation can claim a heavenly body as its own. No planting the flag and saying this is mine. All right. Which means that things like the sites overall, we can't pass laws legally protecting them. The footprints, the rover tracks. Now, you'd have to be insane to go and disturb that stuff. I can't imagine who would do it for what reason. But right at the moment, that's going to have to be revised. Right at the moment, you need an international treaty. All right. I can't think anybody who would go and put their footprint next to Buzz Aldrin's. I can't think anybody would do it. But there is this interesting, it's space law. It's actually it's similar to maritime law, right? But NASA did finally issue, you can find it online, issued guidelines. All right, you want to approach the landing sites. Here's what you're to do, and here's what you're not to do. Okay, but it needs, I think they're going to have to do it something like the national parks, right? Because there will be lunar tourism, and I would go and look at the Apollo landing sites, but like they do the national parks, there are certain areas where you just don't go. You are just not allowed to go. All right, and they want to do scientific research there. So, any other questions? Or?
Are there any competing programs from China, Europe?
China says they're going to land people on the moon within the next 5 years. That's optimistic. All right. But they landed a rover on the far side. All right. They have their own, if anybody could do it, I think 5 years is Chinese, if anybody could do it, the Chinese can. The Russians could, they never did land a person on the moon, but they did land rovers, right? They could, if they get their economic act together. I would prefer if we all did it together, like the Webb telescope was done with Europe. Even there's some European participation in Artemis, right? I think Kennedy would have would have done a joint mission, right? I hope there are others that go, and I hope we do it together, you know? Why not, you know? It's more fun that way. Yeah, I think the Chinese, all right, they clearly are gonna have the capability. Others have tried, it's, you know, it's not easy. The Israelis tried a lunar lander, it crashed. The Indians have done some things, but space is hard, right? But yeah, no, there's competition is good, all right? But I'd prefer if we all did it together, you know?
I
Any other
do.
questions or?
I actually have one more about,
Sure.
like impact on the environment with these launches.
It's minimal.
Really?
Yeah, it looks, I mean, you see all that smoke and everything. NASA actually takes some pretty good protection with the launches. They clear them. They went through this with the shuttle. They would do things to clear birds out of the areas, and the launch pads are just off in the middle of nowhere. I suppose there's some, you know, with whatever, all right, the launch stage, you know, falls back, it burns up in the atmosphere, and there's some remnants that fall into the ocean, but it's really minimal.
But the burning, doesn't that contribute
The
to
rocket
burning?
fuel?
Yeah,
Depends on the fuel.
does it?
Yeah,
Yeah, if you're doing liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, you're just getting water
Really?
product.
yeah. I have read some things that they know that they cannot sustain single-use rockets over the long term, right? SLS is kind of slapped together from parts that they had anyway.
Yeah.
Right, and they want to get back to the moon, and the reusable stuff doesn't have the lift capability for this. You really want to solve that problem. What you have to do is get the launching, forget the surface of the Earth, right? Because that's where all your expense and all of this comes in, is getting it off the surface of the Earth. That's one reason why they want to go back to the moon, right? Do it from the moon. Moon's got its own resources, all right? Or do it from orbit, all right? If you can set up to build and launch this stuff from the moon or from Earth orbit, you've solved a lot of that problem, because then you can just have something like a space shuttle, or even not as, the shuttle was way overpowered. It ended up not needing anywhere near that kind of power. You know, you take a plane up, basically. Like, if you ever saw 2001 Space
Years
Odyssey,
ago, yeah.
right? Those scenes with the Pan Am space plane flying up to the space station, that's actually the way to go with it, right? Get all your launches from a space station or from the moon, and you just take a little shuttle up into orbit.
But then you
It's
need to bring the fuel, right? You need to bring the fuel to the moon.
now we do, but they discovered water on the moon. Believe it or not, there is
Yeah,
water on the
yeah.
moon. It's at the bottom of some of the craters, frozen. That's a game changer, because then
No, they can do like hydrogen.
they can separate hydrogen and oxygen. They can get air and water, and that's the plan, right? That's why they want this gateway thing. All right, you know, your issue comes when you got to lift everything off the surface of the Earth, right? Right at the moment, the environmental impact is minor, but they are aware of this. As space activity, I was just reading about it today. Space activity increases. I think you'll see more of a focus on that. But that's why they want to get a lot of this off, this big heavy stuff off the surface of the Earth,
Mhm.
right? Just do it in space, do it on the moon.
Don says, isn't the SpaceX Starship bigger than the SLS, completely reusable, and also scheduled for its first test flight soon?
I don't know.
Yes,
Is it?
It is?
Yeah,
it stacks taller than anything else.
yeah.
When they stacked it in Boca
yeah,
Chica, they have stacked it, they haven't launched it.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I'm also not sure, it's powerful. I'm not sure that it's more,
It's the most powerful to be able to lift 100 tons.
wow,
Hmm.
yeah.
Do you know when it's going to test flight?
It depends if the FAA will certified Boca Chica in Texas. Could be by May.
Yeah,
If the FAA continues to drag their feet, because they've been delaying month by month or every other month, the environmental impact. If they continue to delay, Musk has already started building in, is it 39A? I think it's pad 39A.
yeah, because
in,
39B is the
Florida.
one that this is going.
Mhm.
Yeah, he's doing Falcon 9s out of 39A, but no, it may be, else, he's doing 30, maybe LC40. Launch complex 40, all Cape Canaveral, but he's starting to build the things that pick up and load, and also.
I don't know if they can, I know the Dragon capsule is not rated for deep space operations.
No.
Right,
Dragon.
they can't do, like, they can't do extravehicular activity from the Dragon capsules or anything like that. You could probably adapt the Orion to go, they'd have to build what's called a fairing, it's an adapter, basically. You could probably adapt the Orion to go on the Starship system, but I actually don't know that much about the SpaceX stuff, but yeah, it's a big heavy lift booster, completely reusable. I suspect that there's refurbishing and whatnot that has to go on, like the old shuttle system. But yeah, they know they're gonna have to get, they're gonna have to go with reusability. But for now, it's like, well, you've got these engines sitting around, and you want to get back to the moon, and let's use it. Otherwise, you just got to throw it out, I think. But anyway, and this is going to launch in a couple of months. Musk is famous for setting a schedule and then not meeting it. I think they're pretty confident this is going to go in a couple of months. Anything else?
I just have one last
Sure.
question, if you guys don't mind. Since I'm watching Lost in Space right now, is the ultimate goal for people to be able to live on these, like on the moon and other planets, or is it really just, for long-term study?
If you listen to Elon Musk,
Yeah,
he insists that we have to become multiplanetary.
I don't think NASA, doesn't talk like that.
But Musk does, and that's part of where Musk says still in this decade he's going to get to Mars. He won't. He'll get to Mars in the 30s, but
Yeah,
Interesting.
I think ultimately the answer to that question is it's up to people,
Mhm.
right? Let's put it this way. Here's an interesting comparison that nobody knows about. We first went to the South Pole in any meaningful way in the early 1900s. Okay. Guess what? We didn't go back there for 50 years, right? Not that there was nothing conspiratorial or anything to it, just people didn't see any point to it. All right. Now we have permanent research stations, McMurdo Sound and then all of that kind of stuff. Anybody want to live at the South Pole? I don't know, it is permanently staffed. I think in the shorter run, you're probably seeing more like that. All right, like I'd love to see a telescope built on the far side of the moon. Okay, the James Webb is incredible, but there's advantages to putting it on a surface with gravity. Okay, you've got materials right there on the moon. You're not that far from Earth, so you can get people, staff, materials. You could do repairs like they did with the Hubble and whatnot. I suspect that in the next 50 years, you're looking more at something like that, like permanent colonies, probably research stations. But of course, if people are going to be staying there for years, right, they're going to bring families. Okay, they're going to want to have schools and that sort of thing. But I think it's up to people to answer that question.
That's a good answer.
And tourism, absolutely. I mean, a week to go look at the old Apollo sites, I would do it. Why not? Or a few days in a space hotel. I already know there are companies looking at this.
Mhm.
Why not? Or go for a joyride. What's wrong with that?
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here
Yeah.
and online. Obviously, this is fascinating
Thank
to
you.
go on. I do want to say that Len's going to speak with us again on May 16th. It's a Monday. It's What's Up in the Sky, Spring Edition. So apparently the sky looks different in different times of the year.
Yeah, well, the Earth moves, so.
That's right. So you guys are welcome to sign
That'll
up
be
for
a
that.
prelude to a public start party. You
Yes.
can all come out and look through the telescope.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yes, Len is famous or infamous, I should say, for doing our star parties and his own, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to that as the weather gets better and it's not as cloudy. Those are usually like announced a day or so beforehand because of the weather implications, right?
Yeah. I can schedule them in advance, but it's up to Mother Nature. And what ends, if I say, sure, let's go out on, June 10th, most of the time I end up just having to cancel and reschedule and cancel and reschedule and cancel. Whereas if I just say, let's go tonight. All right, yeah, I realize that's a little inconvenient for you, but it's gonna be clear. Let's go.
So where are those posted? Like,
So we'll be posting those on our Facebook page
Yeah.
for sure,
Okay.
all of our social media, as soon as we have a date when we know that it's going to happen.
So just help me out here. When you say our social media, what site is that?
The Ashland Public Library
Okay,
in Massachusetts.
I'll post
Because
them
there's
also
that
on
Oregon, yes.
the Ashland Mass Happy Board if
Okay,
Facebook
yeah.
ever lets me do anything again.
You've been banned as it is.
Why?
It started with, all right, 30 years as an educator. I'm into things like facts, knowledge, thinking, reasoning, So I run into, between history and astronomy, it should be illegal to run into this stuff as much as I do. But I run into flat earthers, moon landing deniers, Sandy Hook truthers, birthers, Holocaust deniers. And I hate this stuff, right? So I would get into arguments with these people. And of course, what Facebook, and eventually would just devolve into a shouting match. What Facebook does is lets them off the hook and then goes after me saying, no, you can't call somebody a stupid idiot, right? Well, if you think the moon landings didn't happen, you are a stupid idiot. And what do you, don't get me started, right?
Maybe I shouldn't be reporting this part.
Yeah, well, it's finally, so I don't know what, it'll clear up eventually, but I eventually learned just block these people. You're not going to change their mind,
Yeah.
right? Just block them.
But anything that Len does in terms of like relationship with the library will be posted on our Facebook, the library's Facebook page.
Or, you can still send me, I'm, Len Rabinowitz, or I think I have it as Leonard Rabinowitz. Just send me a Facebook message request or friend request. It still lets me do that. And I can message people about this
okay,
stuff.
that sounds good. I have a,
Or I have an alternate Facebook page, Ashland Astro. And Facebook hasn't figured out that that's
You.
me. So it still lets me do anything.
so just, this is just a matter of curiosity. And not political. So I remember a former guy, President Trump, announced that he was doing a new branch of the military in
Space Force.
And I haven't heard anything about it since. I just.
It does exist.
Yeah.
I don't think it's done much of yet. I'm actually rather hopeful for it. Here's what I don't, I don't want to put bombs in space and start, shooting wars in space. And that's a terrible idea. But if all of this stuff is going to accelerate, which I think it is, I think you guys are looking at a golden age, a second golden age of space exploration. With combined, look at something like the James Webb Telescope. That is unbelievable, right? And then people knock it, but I think it's great. The space tourism, these people going up for, the price will come down, okay? I know there are companies that are looking at building a space hotel, and the next space station, NASA wants private companies to do it, right? So what I'm hoping, right now, we have no capacity for repair in space, none. All right, that's going with the shuttle. The shuttle could do it, but the shuttles can't fly anymore.
There's a lot of robotic stuff coming though.
Yeah, but it's coming, right? We have no capacity for refueling in space. All right. We have no capacity for rescue. All right. I hope that it becomes a kind of Coast Guard, all right, to do that stuff. If we're going to have regular traffic back and forth to the moon, maybe tourist flights or just a larger presence on the moon, You need a cop on the beat.
Right, but Space Force right now just took mostly, like, instead of Air Station, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station, it's Cape Canaveral Space Force Station.
Yeah,
Vandenberg, same thing. Most of the NORAD stuff, the US portion, not the Canadian portion, obviously, but
but you're gonna
that's all
have
Space
to,
Force.
I hate to say it, but you're gonna have to be able to defend or protect or whatever. We can't shoot down satellites, although it's not easy to do.
Mhm.
You're gonna have to be able to protect that stuff. I hope it succeeds. I really do. And, you know, like I said, do I want to place nuclear weapons in orbit? No, that's a stupid idea, right? But something, you know, a police force. I think of it as a Coast Guard, right?
Okay.
Yeah, we're out of the Air Force Academy now, about 70 to 80 of the graduates each year, out of the 800 to 1,000 are going to Space Force now.
That's great.
And so, but we're kind of like the Naval Academy now, where they're going either Marine or Navy. And Air Force is space or air.